A Body to Die For, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 1. Author Grant Michaels, publisher Stonewall Inn Press, narrator Eric Ost. Chapter 8. A Girl from the Golden West. Next morning, Friday, I wore a long-sleeved shirt and bow tie to the shop. The sleeves were to hide the ugly scrapes all the way up my left forearm, where I'd fallen on it last night, trying to avoid the reckless driver. The bow tie was... well, I had my reasons for wearing that. Nicole asked, "Is that this year's Halloween drag?" I smirked. "No, doll. I'm just trying a different look." She wasn't convinced, and as I scanned the appointment book, she noticed the cuts on my hands. "Stanley, are you dealing with rough trade?" "Nothing so interesting, Nikki. Just guerrilla warfare with a Boston driver." I explained what had happened. She said, "Did you report it?" "No, I didn't get a make on the car or the plate number." "So what?" "I want you to call Lieutenant Branco right now, Stanny. That was almost a hit and run. You could have been killed." "Nikki, it's a thin line between life and death." "Is that today's uplifting thought?" "How was the ballet?" "We left at intermission." "With Rapinskaya dancing?" "It was her understudy, darling." "Well, that's a consolation at least. I guess even an assoluta gets tired of those white feathers." I was booked solid all morning with difficult perms and complex multicolored work. When I'm that busy is usually when I get walk-in requests as well, and sure enough, within an hour, a gray-haired woman walked in for a wash and set. I overheard her talking with Nicole at the reception desk. She was tall and full-figured, and with the slightest stoop in her shoulders. She looked in her late 50s, and her unwrinkled complexion and alert eyes indicated that her life, or her attitude at least, was not toilsome. Her voice warbled slightly as she spoke. "I want to have my hair done, and I'm to see Van..." She faltered, and Nicole came to her rescue. "You must mean Vanos." But the woman ignored Nicole's help and fumbled around in her purse. Wait a minute. I know I have that card in here." Nicole said, "It's no problem, madame. I know who you mean. Just tell me your name and I'll check you off in the book." The woman muttered random thoughts as she stirred about in her purse. "Now, where did I put it? Oh, I don't have an appointment. I know it's in here." Nicole looked concerned. "If you have no appointment, madame, I'm afraid our walk-in business is Monday through Thursday only." Finally, the woman found the card. "Here it is! I knew I had it." In victory, she waved the card in front of Nicole, then read it carefully. "I want to see Mr. Vanos. Is that right?" "The Mr. is often dubious," Nicole said, and looked to see if I'd overheard her. I scowled back as I loosely rolled a long strand of blonde hair for a body wave I was working on. Nicole continued, "Madame, I'm sorry. Yes, well, my husband gave me this card, so here I am, and I'd like to have my hair set by Mr. Vanos." "Madame, I understand." An impatient edge had crept into Nicole's voice. "And Monday through Thursday, that would be fine, but today is Friday. You need an appointment." "Oh!" The woman sighed, suddenly crestfallen. "You mean I have to come back another time?" I excused myself from my client, then swooped to the receptionist desk and faced the woman directly. "Are you Mrs. Brickley?" "Oh," she said, caught off guard. "You surprised me." "Forgive me. I overheard you talking just now. I'm Vanos." For a moment her eyes were confused, then she remarked, "So you're the young man." A moment later she smiled, almost like an afterthought. "Well, aren't you nice?" From behind her, Nicole mouthed the words, "Aren't you nice?" smirking as she did it. The woman continued, "I'm Vivian Brickley, and the woman says I can't have my hair done today." Her eyes didn't quite focus on mine. She seemed to be looking at my ears. Perhaps she had ocular problems, or perhaps she was timid, or perhaps she was hiding something. My voice slipped into its gentlest murmur. "Why don't you have a seat, Mrs. Brickley, and I'll see what I can do." "Why, thank you. What a pleasant young man." Again, Nicole mimed the words with a saccharine smile behind the woman's back. As Mrs. Brickley sat down, Nicole mumbled to me, "If she saw your act at Chez tonight, would she hold you in such high esteem?" I retorted, sotto voce, "Fishnet hose and pumps once a year do not a drag queen make. Nikki, she's married to Calvin's boss, and she may know something. I've got to squeeze her in. Stanny, you're already overbooked with 3 people in the next hour." "I can handle it." "Nikki, it's only a shampoo set." "With that hair? That's a job for pin curls, and if I ever saw one." Watch today, doll, as Vivian Brickley discovers the wonders of the soft set. I'll have Ramon shampoo her. "No, I'll wash her. Just tell him to get her into a robe." I wanted every moment of the woman's time to myself. Besides, I didn't appreciate Ramon's help lately. When he'd started as a shampoo boy, he knew his place with the customers, but once he'd gained Nicole's confidence and had a few clients of his own, I caught him occasionally courting my regular patrons. Ramon escorted Mrs. Brickley to a dressing room. Meanwhile, I finished rolling the body wave I was working on. I put her under a dryer, then went to Mrs. Brickley, who was waiting in the shampoo area. As I approached her, she said, "Who was the woman at the desk? She almost kept me from having my hair done." "She's the manicurist, but sometimes she forgets and thinks she owns the place." Nicole overheard me and looked up from her work. I winked back to assure her that her secret was still preserved. I was guiding Mrs. Brickley to the shampoo sink when she suddenly balked. She seemed afraid of it. "I don't much like those things. They always give me a crick in the neck." I assured her that she'd be comfortable in this one. I patted the notch in the sink with a thick fold towel. So, when I laid her head onto it and she said, "Oh, this is comfortable. You have a special touch, young man." "I know," I said honestly, and proceeded to wet her hair. Its texture seemed a little dry, so I chose a moisturizing shampoo from the rack. As I massaged her scalp under the creamy lather, she giggled and remarked, "It smells like a strawberry patch. Reminds me of growing up in California." "Is that where you're from?" She giggled. "I guess you could say that. I'm from all over the world. I traveled a lot in my years." "Vacations are nice," I said, trying to recall my last one. The giggle continued. "They weren't vacations. They were assignments. I was a teacher in the Foreign Service." "That's impressive." Mrs. Brickley laughed. "Oh, it was just a job. I wasn't one of the big wigs. There was always that barrier between the diplomats' lives and mine." I rinsed her hair and applied an almond-scented conditioner. She remarked, "I am going to smell like a regular fruit salad by the time you're done with me." I told her the scent would barely linger. Then I rinsed her once more and wrapped a towel around her wet hair. I supported her head as I helped her up from the sink, and the simple courtesy seemed to surprise her. She giggled again and said, "Thank you. Usually they just leave me to grapple my own way out of the sink." Her word choice amused me. I led her to my station. When she saw herself in the mirror, she chuckled. "I look like a Mata Hari with a turban. When I'm finished, you'll look like a duchess." But her words reminded me of my espionage agreement with Branco. For an instant, I wondered if someone as mirthful as Vivian Brickley could be playing the same part for someone else. I asked her if she wanted something to read while I briefly tended to my other client. Instead of answering, she pulled a copy of the New York Times from her bag. "I always carry it with me," she said with a titter. I left her alone while I neutralized and rinsed the body wave, perhaps a little too quickly, but I was eager to get back to Mrs. Brickley. When I returned to her, I began my work by combing and separating her hair into sections that would complement her features and the shape of her head. As I grabbed the first roller, she said, "Oh, aren't you going to use pins?" "Damn, Nikki," she pegged the woman right off. "I'd like to try something different," I answered boldly, and oblivious to her concern, I rolled a lock of her hair around an anodized aluminum tube. "But my other hairdresser always used pins." "I'm not your other hairdresser," I thought, "and I don't have the time or the desire to do pin curls today." But I spoke secretively, near her ear. "For you, Mrs. Brickley, I see something more daring," like an understated gesture. She tittered again. "I must say my husband was right in your recommendations, recommending you to me. I don't remember when I had this much fun at the hairdresser." I continued rolling her hair up. "Did you meet your husband on one of your trips?" "Goodness, no, not at all. He spent just about all his life in New England. Doesn't like to travel." "That must be awkward since you seem to like it so much." "It hasn't come up yet. Actually, we've only been married, well, it's not quite a year yet. I guess you'd call it an autumn romance. We're still working out the kinks." She laughed. "I can't imagine anyone having difficulty getting along with you. You're so cheery and optimistic." "Well, I had doubts about marrying so late in my life, especially the first time. And to a younger man." She chortled now. "It's almost scandalous." I pretended to join in her laughter while Nikki mimed me with a mocking grin on her face. Mrs. Brickley continued more quietly, of course. "I'm jesting. Roy is not a young man by any means. He certainly appears useful." "Oh, heavens, yes. He loves to exercise. His physique is excellent. I'm sure he could have married a woman half his age instead of one 8 years older." Her voice trailed off with a doubtful, bewildered sound. "Of course, we are very happy, except that Roy has the ideal to retire out west in a few years. I'd just as soon stay here in New England. We have a barn of a house in Cambridge, and it's perfect base for my wanderlust. If you can travel 6 or 8 months of the year, Boston is a great place to live." I continued wrapping her hair in rollers, and she said quietly for a few minutes. Then I asked her, "How long have you known Calvin Redding?" "Oh!" she exclaimed as though I'd startled her. Then she answered calmly, "I met Calvin shortly after I married my husband, last year, but I gather they'd known each other long before that. And you?" she asked. "Calvin's been a client for about a year." She put her magazine down. "And my husband." "Your husband what, Mrs. Brickley?" I didn't understand what she meant, and when I checked her reflection in the mirror, she looked displeased about something. "When did you meet him?" she asked with a tinge of crossness. "I just met him yesterday." "And that was through Calvin?" I paused, wondering what she was finishing for. Then I said, "Yes, indirectly." "I see," she said, sounding unsatisfied. "Where did you meet him?" "Calvin?" "No, my husband." "At his office?" Then, anticipating her next question, I said, "And Calvin was referred by a fashion model who is a longtime customer." "I see." She seemed relieved to hear that, and everything else was sugar cake from then on. "Well, young man, I think it's admirable that you want to help Calvin Redding. It's absurd that the police suspect him of anything." I lowered my voice to imply we were trading inside information. "I'm going to do whatever is necessary to find who killed Roger Fairbrook and why." Vivian Brickley adopted my hushed voice. "If there's any way I can help." "I'll remember that," I whispered back. Then I raised my voice back to a normal level and asked, What part of California are you from? My family is from Sacramento, but we have land in other parts of the state too. Have you ever been out west? No, but I want to go sometime. You really must. It's beautiful. Just being out there seems to expand the mind. I didn't realize then that a subliminal suggestion had been planted. I wrapped the last roller there. You're ready for the dryer? Already? That's so much faster than pens, and even more effective, as you'll soon see. I called Ramon to put her under a dryer as I began working on my next customer, a color and set. Mrs. Brickley would be ready for combing out in 20 minutes, which gave me just enough time to finish client A and supply the color to client B. Fortunately for me, client C was late, as usual, and hadn't arrived yet. When Mrs. Brickley was dry, I quickly combed her out while she read quips from the New Yorker about improper English usage. I finished with a sprunch of soft-hold hairspray and said, Viola. She looked up from her magazine into the mirror. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment I was afraid I'd gone too far with her hair. But then she smiled and said, Why, it's the way I've always wanted my hair done, but nobody's ever succeeded. Aren't you clever? You deserve an accolade for your work. I appreciated the 50-cent word, but all I'd done was use the natural springiness of her hair to find the best direction for the waves, rather than force them into submission with tight curls. I'd have to admit, for a mature woman, Vivian Berkeley looked damn good, due in part for my ministrations, of course. She got up from the chair and patted her hair. It's so soft, too. Kudos to you, young man. I think I'll take myself to lunch now and read the rest of my magazine. She gave me a good tip and said, That's a fine bow tie you're wearing. She left the shop in high spirits. Within minutes, Nicole came by my station. Find out anything from Matron Jolly Jowls? I related the basic facts. Vivian Brickley was a retired private teacher. She and Roy Brickley were almost newlyweds. She came from the West, and she liked to travel. Nicole pressed me. That's all? Well, she seemed very interested in knowing how I'd met Calvin and her husband. She suspects somebody of something, but I don't know whom or what. I'll tell you what I think, Stanny. I don't trust the good-natured, doddering old woman act a bit. It's just a ploy to get what she wants. Nicky, that is an ageist remark. Open your eyes, darling. Vivian Brickley and I are the same vintage. Now imagine us standing side by side, while which one would you believe on the witness stand? Doll, don't put me on the line like that. Oh, you, Nicole huffed impatiently. She didn't fool me one bit. I went back to work. A few hours later, when I finished my last midday appointment, I had the receptionist call a cab for me to Cambridge. I yelled across the station. Salon. Nicole heard me and glanced up from the fingernails she was covering with frosty peach-colored enamel. Where are you off to now? Back to the drawing board. I wanted to nose around the Choate group some more, maybe find out why Mrs. Brickley was so interested in how I met Calvin and her husband. Don't forget your 4 o'clock appointment with Mr. Channel 8. How could I miss my favorite butch anchorman? I grabbed my leather jacket and bounded out of the shop. When the cab pulled up, I told the husky driver my destination and handed her a $20 bill. That's your tip, hun. Pedal to the metal. She moved the cab through Newbury Street traffic like a Maserati and slid us onto the entrance ramp to the Massachusetts Turnpike. I quietly studied her close-cropped hair and the hint of a mustache on her upper lip while we broke the speed limit all the way to the Cambridge exit. From there, I directed her to the Choate group. When I got out of the cab, I said, If you wait here, there's another 20 to get me back to town on the same magic carpet. Her work shirt had the name Bob stitched onto the jacket pocket. She said, "You got a deal." Then she turned off the motor and pulled out a copy of Leisure Life magazine. Today, Patrick, the receptionist, almost smiled at me. "Here to see Miss Doughton again?" "Exactly." I wondered what drug had caused his upward mood shift. He beamed and said, "Your name again, please." "Kraychik." I pronounced it clearly. "Stan Kraychik." Patrick looked confused. Perhaps he was remembering that I'd been Carlisle Harrington yesterday. "And you're to see Miss Doughton concerning what matter?" "Same as yesterday." As he pressed the button to call Jean, I said, "That's all right. She's expecting me." I walked by his desk into the skylit atrium and went directly up the ramp to her office. I stuck my head in the door to her office and asked, "Got a minute?" The air smelled of recently chewed peanuts. "What do you want?" There was a wheeze in her voice, probably from large quantities of goobers consumed without a suitable beverage. I said, "I got to see the police reports yesterday." "So?" "The story you told them and the story you told me don't agree." She shrugged. I said, "I want to know which version is the truth. My mother taught me never to lie to the police. Unlike my Czech grandmother, who warned me as a child never to tell them the truth. What would she have thought of her favorite grandson, Stanislav, named after a heroic Slavic warrior, now reduced to a Back Bay hairdresser who was a stoolie for the BPD?" Jeannie continued, "I see you got to meet the boss yesterday. Did he say anything to you afterward?" "He'd seen us talking and asked me what you wanted." "What did you tell him?" "That's for me to know, isn't it?" "I'm surprised he'd even care. I talked to him myself, after all." "I think it's your manner," said Jeannie. "The way you buzz around like a persistent flying insect. It's bothersome." Mr. Brickley didn't seem to mind. Actually, he seems like an easygoing kind of guy. But I wonder why his wife would care where I met him. "You know his wife, too?" "I did her hair this morning." "You sure do get around, mister." "I met a lot of people working with the public, Jeannie. But do you have any idea who this wife would care where I met Mr. Brickley? Maybe it's all the time he spends at the gym instead of here at the drafting table, or at home of his conjugal duties. I would think she'd be happy with such a physically fit husband." "I hear there's more action at his gym than what happens on the exercise equipment." "Meaning?" "If you don't know, mister, I'm certainly not going to explain it." "Well, I don't see anything wrong with keeping fit," said Stanley. The health club hypocrite. "Health is one thing, but those physical culturists take it to a perverse degree. I know it's hard to believe, but I was a size 10 when I started working here. With the hours I have to work now, though, health clubs and regular meals are a luxury I don't have time for." I looked sadly at the big woman who'd literally lost touch with her body. She lived at the other end of the same spectrum of those people who also measure their life's experience in pounds and inches. The fitness addicts. "Maybe you work too hard, Jeannie." "Maybe some people don't work hard enough. In the end, someone else always has to make up for it." Why did I think of the grasshopper and the ants? Jeannie went on. "Roy Brickley may be fit as an athlete, but he's a senior partner in this firm, and he can't even maneuver a French curve anymore." Something about that sounded provocative. "Jeannie, I'm sorry to hear how hard your life is, but I still think we can help each other." "Why don't you just give it up?" "Why would I even waste any more time with you?" "Because if you can help me find information that convicts Calvin, you'll end up with the promotion instead of him. You can finally get even for all those times you had to work extra to pull his share of the load. Would you rather see him released and get that job from you?" "Of course not. But what can I do about it?" "Just listen to me." She sat back and made the chair groan under the strain of her weight. Go ahead, talk, waste some more oxygen. I leaned toward her, hoping to seem more earnest. You worked with Calvin, right? You saw him 8 hours a day. Ha! On a good day, he might put in 4 hours. Claims he's paid for what he knows, not what he does. Jeannie, you have complete access to the computer. Go in there and read his calendar. Find out everything he was doing before Roger Fayrbrook arrived in Boston. You work here. You know where all the important stuff is. She listened, but she didn't look convinced, so I continued. The harangue. The other day you said you had ways of finding out things. Well, now's the time to use them. You don't miss anything, do you? I miss plenty. So you want me to spy for you, is that it? People have done worse things to find answers. Was this espionage business contagious? I wondered. I can't do that, she exclaimed. Her huge body jolted, then rebounded softly for a moment. It was time to pull out all the stops. Jeannie, are you just going to sit there and let this all happen to you? This is your chance, the big one, to take control of things around you. You can create a new life for yourself, but you have to do something. I was sounding like the promotional hype for a self-help program with a word from Mrs. Brickley's New Yorker popped into my head. Jeannie, I said, this is your peripetia. She rocked around in her chair. It teetered dangerously on its flimsy pedestal. Finally she spoke. That's a big word. She pulled out a cigarette and lit it. And I know what it means, too. She rocked herself in a cloud of smoke and thought a while. Okay, she said. You give a pretty good spiel. I'll look around, see what I can find. Good. You still have my card? I asked. She nodded. Just keep your eyes and ears open. If I don't hear from you soon, I'll be back. I'm not promising anything. I just think of that job. As I was leaving her office, she said, You're pretty brazen to wear a bow tie around here. Why? Wasn't that ranger strangled with one? So the story goes. The boss hasn't worn one since the killing. Does he usually? He and Calvin both. They usually look like the Bobbsey twins. Well, I wear them because they're fun, and I thought because they got different responses from people. I left Jeannie's office and trotted down the ramp. Coming up the ramp toward me was Roy Brickley. Back again, huh? He asked, as his eyes admired my tie. He smiled and said, My wife just called from downtown. She's delighted with her new hairdo. I'm glad she's pleased. It's all thanks to you. He waved me off and walked forcefully up into Jeannie's office. He didn't even question my presence there. Maybe he believed I really was on Calvin's side. For a minute, I watched Jeannie and Roy Brickley through the glass wall of her office. She handed him a packet of papers. Then she pointed to me. Mr. Brickley turned and looked, but he didn't acknowledge me. The two of them weren't saying much to each other, but I still wished I was a fly on the wall. When I walked out the front door, Bob, the cadet, was waiting to whisk me back to the shop. On the fast ride back, I thought about my pep talk to Jeannie, and I thought about what I should do to change the course of events so far. I felt that I was getting nowhere. Everything was vague and frustrating. I needed to change my whole vision and do something. I needed to expand my mind. Those words jogged my memory, and that's when the answer came to me. Go west, young man. It was an extreme course of action, but it was time for me to take control now. When I got to the shop, I rubbed Nicole by the elbow and dragged her to the back room. Nikki, I said breathlessly, since my heart was racing, I have an idea. I'm probably crazy. You are crazy, darling, she interrupted. What's happened to you? Your pupils are dilated. Nikki, I want to go to California. Certainly, Stanny, she said calmly, as though dealing with a psychotic. Next spring on your vacation. No, Nikki, I mean now, tonight. I want to go to Yosemite and poke around in Roger's end of the world. Nicole was speechless. I said, it's the only choice I have right now. If that's what you believe, Stanley, then you do need a rest. Nikki, I'm not finding answers here. Nothing. Stanley, you must drop this silly notion right now. It's ridiculous. But the killer is still free. That's not your concern. It is. No, it isn't. So what should I do? Just wait around until the next time Calvin comes in? Then just frost his hair as usual? Is that your solution? Even if Calvin is guilty, and even if he is acquitted, there's nothing you can do about it. But I'm sure there is, Nikki. There has to be an answer somewhere. Someone knows something, and if that person isn't here in Boston, then maybe they're out in California, where Roger came from. And don't you give me any line about Roger. I won't stand by and watch you turn your life upside down for a man you splashed around with for 20 minutes. I don't care what kind of fantasy he was for you. So you think I should just pretend nothing happened? I think you should know when to accept things you can't change. You sound like that old prayer, Nicole sighed in exasperation. Stanley, if for no other reason, your running off to California is simply irresponsible. What about your appointments? You can reschedule them, and Abby can come in for the critical ones. Abby was an old friend of Nicole's from New York, who occasionally styled at the shop. And Ramon can handle the walk-ins. One dip and a clip by him, and they'll appreciate the value of reserving time with me. Don't be so sure. He does very good work. Nicole paused and looked at me straight in the eye. Well, as usual, I can see you have your mind made up already with everything. All neatly planned. Just how do you intend to pay for this little excursion? Ah, Nikki, there's the rub. Most of it can go on plastic. Then I gave her my younger brother in trouble look. But I'll need some cash from the till. Nicole hooted loudly. You want me to finance a wild goose chase to California? Only part of it, and it's not a wild goose chase. Now, will you help me? Nicole sighed heavily again, then she shrugged. What are your friends for? Thanks, Nikki, I said, and hugged her. Immediately, I called my travel agent and made the arrangements. At least he was pleased to hear I'd be traveling. I'd have to go standby, but if I got on, my plane would leave Boston at 8 o'clock that night and arrive in California 5.5 hours later. At 10:30 the same evening, already I liked the idea of a place where time was created just by flying there. After calling some friends to cancel my weekend plans, my annual appearance at Ches, I spent the rest of my working day anticipating my first trip to California. Sure, it was a serious kind of trip, but I was also eager to see the part of the country where they grew them like Roger. Later, when I got home, Sugar Baby greeted me with a trill and a stretch. I bent to pick her up and found an envelope lying on the carpet. It had been slipped under the door. The note inside was composed of letters cut out from magazines. Keep out or you'll be joining the Ranger. First, I wondered what magazine the letters came from. Then I wondered who left it for me, and finally I thought, how melodramatic. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.